who lacks sex speaks about sex, hungry talks about food, a person who has no money, about money, and our oligarchs and bankers talk about morality. Sexuality is the key to the problem of the psychoneuroses and of the neuroses in general. No one who disdains the key will ever be able to unlock the door. We know less about the sexual life of little girls than of boys. But we need not feel ashamed of this distinction. After all, the sexual life of adult women is a dark continent for psychology. No one who has seen a baby sinking back satiated from the breast and falling asleep with flushed cheeks and a blissful smile can escape the reflection that this picture persists as a prototype of the expression of sexual satisfaction in later life. Homosexuality is assuredly no advantage, but it is nothing to be ashamed of, no vice, no degradation. It cannot be classified as an illness. A man's heterosexuality will not put up with any homosexuality, and vice versa. In matters of sexuality we are at present, every one of us, ill or well, nothing but hypocrites. Much of our highly valued cultural heritage has been acquired at the cost of sexuality. The woman who refuses to see her sexual organs as mere wood chips, designed to make the man's life more comfortable, is in danger of becoming a lesbian, an active, phallic woman, an intellectual virago with a fire of her own. The lesbian body is a particularly pernicious and depraved version of the female body in general. It is susceptible to autoeroticism, clitoral pleasure, and self-actualization. The only person with whom you have to compare yourself is you in the past. The interpretation of dreams is the royal road to a knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind. The mind is like an iceberg, it floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water. Thought is action and rehearsal. It is a predisposition of human nature to consider an unpleasant idea untrue, and then it is easy to find arguments against it. No neurotic harbors thoughts of suicide which are not murderous impulses against others redirected upon himself. Love in the form of longing and deprivation lowers the self-regard. The ego refuses to be distressed by the provocations of reality, to let itself be compelled to suffer. It insists that it cannot be affected by the traumas of the external world. It shows, in fact, that such traumas are no more than occasions for it to gain pleasure. Conservatism, however, is too often a welcome excuse for lazy minds, loath to adapt themselves to fast-changing conditions. I had thought about cocaine in a kind of daydream. You wanted to kill your father in order to be your father yourself. Now you are your father, but a dead father. The more perfect a person is on the outside, the more demons they have on the inside. The dream is the liberation of the spirit from the pressure of external nature, a detachment of the soul from the fetters of matter. The liberty of the individual is no gift of civilization. It was greatest before there was any civilization. We are so constituted that we can gain intense pleasure only from the contrast, and only very little from the condition itself. Where questions of religion are concerned, people are guilty of every possible sort of dishonesty and intellectual misdemeanor. America is the most grandiose experiment the world has seen, but, I am afraid, it is not going to be a success. As regards intellectual work, it remains a fact, indeed, that great decisions in the realm of thought and momentous discoveries and solutions of problems are only possible to an individual, working in solitude. Words and magic were in the beginning one and the same thing, and even today words retain much of their magical power. Humanity has in the course of time had to endure from the hands of science two great outrages upon its naive self-love. The first was when it realized that our Earth was not the center of the universe, but only a tiny speck in a world system of a magnitude hardly conceivable. This is associated in our minds with the name of Copernicus, although Alexandrian doctrines taught something very similar. The second was when biological research robbed man of his peculiar privilege of having been specially created, and relegated him to a descent from the animal world, implying an ineradicable animal nature in him. This transvaluation has been accomplished in our own time upon the instigation of Charles Darwin, Wallace, and their predecessors, and not without the most violent opposition from their contemporaries. But man's craving for grandiosity is now suffering the third and most bitter blow from present-day psychological research, which is endeavoring to prove to the ego of each one of us that he is not even master in his own house, but that he must remain content with the various scraps of information about what is going on unconsciously in his own mind. We psychoanalysts were neither the first or the only ones to propose to mankind that they should look inward, but it appears to be our lot to advocate it most insistently and to support it by empirical evidence which touches every man closely. Smoking is indispensable if one has nothing to kiss. The commandment, "Love thy neighbor as thyself," is the strongest defense against human aggressiveness and an excellent example of the unpsychological expectations of the cultural superego. The commandment is impossible to fulfill. Such an enormous inflation of love can only lower its value, not get rid of the difficulty. Civilization pays no attention to all this, it merely admonishes us that the harder it is to obey the precept, the more meritorious it is to do so. But anyone who follows such a precept in present-day civilization only puts himself at a disadvantage vis-a-vis the person who disregards it. What a potent obstacle to civilization aggressiveness must be, if the defense against it can cause as much unhappiness as aggressiveness itself. Natural ethics, as it is called, has nothing to offer here except the narcissistic satisfaction of being able to think oneself better than others. At this point, the ethics based on religion introduces its promises of a better afterlife. But so long as virtue is not rewarded here on earth, ethics will, I fancy, preach in vain. I too think it quite certain that a real change in the relations of human beings to possessions would be of more help in this direction than any ethical commands, but the recognition of this fact among socialists has been obscured and made useless for practical purposes by a fresh idealistic misconception of human nature. What is common in all these dreams is obvious. They completely satisfy wishes excited during the day which remain unrealized. They are simply and undisguisedly realizations of wishes. The individual does actually carry on a double existence, one designed to serve his own purposes and another as a link in a chain, in which he serves against, or at any rate without, any volition of his own. A religion, even if it calls itself a religion of love, must be hard and unloving to those who do not belong to it. Civilized society is perpetually menaced with disintegration through this primary hostility of men towards one another. It would be very nice if there were a God who created the world and was a benevolent providence, and if there were a moral order in the universe and an afterlife, but it is a very striking fact that all this is exactly as we are bound to wish it to be. The time comes when each of us has to give up as illusions the expectations which, in his youth, he pinned upon his fellow men, and when he may learn how much difficulty and pain has been added to his life by their ill will. We are what we are because we have been what we have been, and what is needed for solving the problems of human life and motives is not moral estimates but more knowledge.